just 30 years, maybe 40 years, but that's not very long. Of course, I'm getting older.
You too?
Yeah. But did we go too far with environmental regulation? Well, that's a question that the legislature struggles with every time it comes to town. I mean, there's a lot of natural resource bills that get introduced every session, and they're all struggling with that precise question. How far do we need to go? How far should we go? How far do the citizens want us to go? Another way to put that question is, how clean is clean? You know, is clean 100%? You know, you've all got water on your tables, and you think that that is H2O, but it's not. Water that is H2O and absolutely nothing else exists only in a very sophisticated laboratory. The water coming down our streams and coming out your faucet is not 1,000% H2O. It's got all kinds of stuff in it. I mean, think about when you, especially if you have well water, which I do, but think about how often you have to run vinegar through your coffee pot just to get rid of the calcium deposits that came from what? Your drinking water. I mean, it's not pure H2O. And yet it meets, obviously, it meets the drinking water standards that have been set by the federal government and also by the state government, in some cases even stricter than the federal standards. So again, the question is, how clean does clean need to be? And that's a question that the legislature struggles with. That's a question that Congress struggles with. It seems to me that we sit on vast resources in this state. In fact, I once heard somebody give a talk and say that there is, geographically about the same size as Montana, there's only one place in the world that has more natural resources, and that's the country of Burma. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but I know that we have a lot of natural resources in this state. And I see no reason why we can't develop them in a responsible way. And responsible means responsible environmentally. It also means responsible in social ways, such as, you know, the good jobs. So yeah, I think it's gone too far, and I think, really, I think that we are starting to recognize that, and we're starting to go back to that. I mean, the governor's talking about, you know, coal. There's more and more oil and gas development. There's some talk about mining, not much yet.
Pat, what would you say to that? We've gone too far.
Well, it depends on the resources, Lawrence knows, and other elements. I don't, you know, I hear a lot, we all do, as we should, about the marketplace. There are a lot of marketplaces, the marketplace of ideas, which the humanities deals with. There's the marketplace of goods and services. There's a marketplace of price for minerals and wood from our forests. And all those things have combined, along with America's reawakening about the environmental degradation that went on in the past. Now, did we overdo it some on some environmental laws? Well, I suppose we're all human. We just write words and they become law. And so maybe some we underdid and some we overdid. So I don't deny there have been some mistakes, but I think we've taken a pretty good opportunity to try to right old wrongs. But getting back to the marketplace and to the marketplace of productivity and the marketplace of competition. My wife, Carol, who you know, did you get to see her? By the way, did you tell me you saw her going out? Yeah, Carol. Carol didn't care enough about you and me to stay here and watch this.
I know. She told me that.
She's actually a very wise person.
Yeah. She had a date. I'm praying with another woman. Is there a rock band or something in town?
Ludafest.
Who's in town?
Ludafest, women's filmmakers.
Oh, the Ludafest. Okay, well. Can't imagine that drawing Carol away from Lawrence Grossfield, but I guess it did. Carol's brother, his name was Bobby. Bobby's dead now, he died young, but Bobby worked in the Berkeley pit when the Anaconda Company laid off thousands of miners and closed the deep mines, having zip to do with environmentalism, nothing. It had to do with competition, the world market of competition. And they opened that pit, and they hired Bobby, who was an extraordinarily good operator of heavy equipment, and he handled a shovel, and I was in it. I was at the bottom of the pit in those days. It wasn't as deep as it is now, and I climbed up the 12 steps or whatever it was to the cabin, and I stood in the bucket. I think that piece of equipment could have removed the DoubleTree in 15 bites, 10 bites. And Bobby, not intentionally, but he put 300-400 miners out of work operating that shovel. Because the miners he put out of work used to operate with a shovel this big and a stick on the end of it, right? That was their shovel. So things changed in Montana, but a lot of it, I submit, was because of the marketplace of productivity. We also have that labor marketplace. We want most Americans want their fellow Americans to be well paid. Companies don't want that. They just don't want it. That's why they moved to Chile. Not only is the resource down there, the dollar an hour workers are down there. So they'd be damned if they're going to pay $9, $12 an hour in Butte when they can pay 90 cents in Chile. So they left. And so some of that, some of that, as Lawrence so well knows, is part of the effect in Montana. Just one more piece about that. I always maintain there are two kinds of environmentalists. One is Walden Pond, solitude, environmental sobriety, walking around, enjoying. The other kind of environmentalist is not Walden Pond, is Berkeley Pit. I'm a Berkeley Pit environmentalist. I'm pissed. That's why I'm an environmentalist. They wrecked the joint. Lawrence is right. They didn't know. It was the template of the moment. It was the template of the time up to a point. Up to a point. Then they knew, but they went ahead anyhow. So there's good and bad in this treasure state of ours. So let me now hand it back to Brian, but close with this. I opened with Ori y Plata on this question and calling ourselves a treasure state. What do we call ourselves now? The last best place. There's a transition for you, huh?
Yeah, let's talk about that. There's a couple of specifics, because right now I think we're talking more at a certain level where the disagreements may not be clear, and I think there are some disagreements certainly in the community and maybe reflected here. When Lawrence talks about reasonable use of environmental resources, it's hard for anybody to disagree with that statement. But it comes down to, please tell me if you disagree, the standards that Montana has in law for what you've got to do before you can open a mine or drill for oil or gas. In contrast, let's say, with Wyoming. And one of the arguments made by the pro-resources people is, look at Wyoming, they have many more jobs, blah, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, a much more vibrant industry. Now, when you were in the state legislature, you sponsored legislation to change the clean and healthful environment provision in the 1972 Constitution of the state of Montana, which places, as I recall, as a fundamental right, a clean and healthful environment. As a citizen, I looked at that and I said, that's a serious change. So it suggests something, since you're a serious guy, it suggests you felt there was a problem with that fundamental phrase and its implementation in law. Can you be specific about why you did it and what you think about that?
Well, yeah, actually I made more than one attempt to grapple with that issue. And really the way the issue, let me back up. Really what the issue amounted to was a separation of powers issue. And most people didn't understand that because most people just read the bill and thought, like in your case,
Most people like me
thought, oh my God. But it was a separation of powers issue. And what the deal was the Montana Supreme Court, from time to time, like I suppose most Supreme Courts, goes out on a limb and comes up with a decision that a lot of people question. And I'm not necessarily talking about people with a vested interest. I'm talking about, you know, law professor type people. Look at it and say, how in the world could you do this? That was not a well-supported decision. And the issue was, had to do with the clean and healthful provision of the Constitution, which is Article 9. And I knew you were going to ask me something about this, so I brought it.
In summary.
Article 9, well, it's very brief, actually, and it says the state and everybody shall maintain a clean and healthful environment. And the next one says the legislature shall provide for the administration and enforcement of this duty. And the last one says the legislature shall provide adequate remedies for the protection and remedies to prevent unreasonable depletion. Which, I mean, just a plain reading of that says, well, it's up to the legislature to figure this out. In other words, to spell out the details behind this constitutional provision. And interestingly, and what one of my bills did, it didn't try and amend this provision, it tried to amend Article 2, which is the Declaration of Rights. And I think this is very important for people to think about. It's Article 2, Section 3, all people are born free and have certain inalienable rights. They include the right to a clean and healthful environment and the rights of pursuing life's basic necessities, enjoying and defending their lives in liberty, acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, and seeking their safety, health, and happiness in all lawful ways. And it doesn't say, you know, this one's more important than that one. They're all equally important. And what the court was doing was tending towards favoring one of those as opposed to the others. And what my bills tried to do in different ways was to say, you know, there's got to be balance. You've got to consider all of these, and there's got to be a balance.
Okay, and if I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but it could help correct me if I'm wrong. Your assessment was that the implementation of that standard was unnecessarily or excessively interfering with the development of natural resources. Is that a fair statement?
Well, yeah, it was tending in that direction.
Okay.
And yeah.
Do you agree with that perspective, Pat? In other words, there's really kind of a fork in the road here that I'm seeing. Either the state over time emphasizes non-extractive, and I don't use that word in any way as a pejorative, just the utilization from the ground of natural resources, looks for other engines to drive the economy versus the more traditional history. And we've made that shift, and I believe it's fair to say Lawrence feels we've gone too far. We're interfering with reasonable use of natural resources to the detriment of the welfare of the people. Is that fair, Lawrence? Roughly speaking?
Close enough.
Okay. Pat, do you agree or disagree, and why? And then we want to move on to another question.
Well, I think Lawrence really means it when he says, you know, close enough. He's, you know, political wonks watch other politicians. And so I know some of the senator's record. And he did not seem to me, and does not seem to me tonight. It's the first time Lawrence and I've had the pleasure of appearing with you, and I hope you with me.
It's a pleasure. In
Thank
fact,
you.
I've been looking forward to it.
Yeah, I have too, Lawrence. Lawrence,
Don't
as you
believe
can
any of
tell,
that,
is
don't believe any
yeah,
of
right, yeah, yeah. That's
That's
you
the
hear it in the
boxing
Senate,
coach
right?
talking.
Yeah, yeah. My good friend, and I really do mean he's my good. You hear that in the Senate debate all the time. I'm not quite sure what we're asking, although your question is very clear. But I agree that Montana had to step into a new era of environmental protection. I think we had to do that. I like the words in the Constitution, and I think I like them where they are, but I had never considered the matter before. Even though I knew your record, I hadn't considered whether this was placing the authority for that potentially in the wrong hands. That's an interesting thing. But if I'm going to fall down, if I have to fall down on one side or the other, I just decided when I was in the Congress, I wasn't a big environmentalist. I'm a moderate environmentalist, I guess. But I wasn't even that when I went to the Congress. I just started to look and see things and look more closely. And so I became a bit of an environmentalist when I was in the Congress. So ever since then, if I have to fall down on the side of more extraction or a better environment, I almost always fall down on the side of a better environment. That's just kind of how I came out.
Okay, let's talk about another aspect of this. We talked about population growth. I want to focus on the immigration of wealthy, well-to-do relative to Montana, which is a very low-income state. Depending on which statistics you look at, we're 45th or 47th in per capita income. It's always a shock to read that. I think we're number one